Hey everybody, this is Dr. Liz. I am recording this video to talk about a cool new thing that I got sent to me by the people who made it, which is the Non-Monogamy card game. So this is the box. You can see it's got the name on it and some cool cover art. So this was created by a couple of therapists who are out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and they wanted to create a tool that folks could use to prompt good conversations in their non-monogamous relationships and help them explore topics that they might need to talk about but haven't brought up or didn't know to think about and talk about yet. So to read the letter that they sent me, we are a brand new, small, woman-owned Bay Area business, and we spent the last year designing, developing, and testing the game in order for those curious about or already practicing non-monogamy might find it helpful in creating and maintaining relationships as they grow and bloom over time. Our testers wanted something simple, flexible, and fun to play, but also a game that pushed them to deepen their self-knowledge and skills in communicating and relating to their needs and desires and practicing whatever form of non-monogamy they chose. We also wanted a, dare we say, beautiful product that you would be proud to have on your shelf or coffee table even when you are not using it. Additionally, we wanted to create something durable, light, and portable so you can easily take it in the car on trips, dates, and adventures. So the game, when you get it, comes with 2 decks of cards. So I pulled one out so I can show you individual cards from it, but it comes with a foundations deck and a deeper dive deck. I'm just gonna drop things, it's cool. You can tell I don't do a lot of unboxing product review videos because I don't know how to make my hands work for these yet. All right, so it also comes with a set of instructions for how to play the game and some vocabulary terms that are used on the cards that folks may not know yet. So the gameplay, the way that we recommend it, is that you should use the foundations deck for solo reflection or to start a new conversation about non-monogamy with a current or new partner. So if you're opening up. And use the deep dive deck if you're already practicing non-monogamy and need to create new agreements or change them. They do say that even if you're not new to non-monogamy, they recommend you start with the foundations deck. And I have mixed feelings about that I'll get into in a moment. They do say that not all questions will apply to all relationships, which I found to be absolutely true. And that you can skip the questions that don't apply, or you can go through a deck and pull specific cards that you want to make sure you talk about. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps for instructions. Begin with the foundations deck before moving on to the deep dive deck. Shuffle and stack the deck of unplayed cards between the players. No specific order is needed. Pull a card from the deck for the person to your right to answer. So this is intended to be able to be played with alone, with one other person, or with a larger group of people who are in a polycule together or something. So they want the person to your right to answer it. Play continues to the right until each person has had a chance to answer the question. Record any notes or agreements that arise from the round before moving on. So in terms of my thoughts on this, I think that this is a really great idea. There's a ton of cards. There's so many cards. So each deck, I'm wondering if they have the number of cards anywhere. 150 questions. So there's 75 in each deck. So there's a ton of different questions there. The thing that I would say is I played this with one of my sweeties. That sweetie then played it with one of his partners. And both of our experiences were that the foundations deck was not particularly appropriate to where those relationships or those people were at. I've been doing non-monogamy, on and off since high school, but as my primary or only relationship style since 2010 for the most part, with a 1-year break in there that I did monogamy for ill-advised reasons. Whole other story for another day. But because I've been doing non-monogamy for a long time, and because I write about non-monogamy and talk about non-monogamy and teach about non-monogamy, a lot of the questions in the foundations deck were really basic for where I'm at and didn't seem super applicable to me and the relationship that I was in. So the foundations cards say foundations on the front, and on the back they have this kind of dark brown color. What I do like is that the colors of the cards is different. So the fronts are different, so deep dive versus foundations, and the colors on the backs is different, which makes it really easy for figuring out which deck you've got and what questions you're looking at. Foundations questions, so when do you feel most insecure in your relationships? How is commitment modeled for you as a child? How do you feel about the use of pornography? How public will our non-monogamy be amongst our friends? And so Is there a sense of time impacting this discussion for you? Why? So like these are all good questions. I just found that for me, they weren't super applicable because a lot of these are questions that seemed more tailored to people who have been monogamous and are working on opening up rather than people who have been non-monogamous for a while and like already have a lot of the kind of like framework of how they approach non-monogamy and what their personal boundaries are and what their like deal breakers are. So the foundations deck questions were like quick, fun, easy answers. And I think if you're in a relationship where one or more of the people in that relationship is nervous about these kinds of conversations, it could be a good way to kind of like break the ice and get things going in a way that's a little bit less challenging than some of the questions in the deeper dive deck might be. I also do think that if you're someone who's trying to like open a relationship that's previously been monogamous, those could be really helpful questions. I haven't read through all of them. I will run through all. But, I mean, again, I think there are some good questions in there, absolutely. And I think, again, more applicable to folks who are newer to starting, which makes sense. The deep dive deck I've really enjoyed. And something that my sweetie and I have started doing is on Marco Polo, we will pull a card and then flip a coin, heads or tails, to determine who's going to answer that question first. And then answer that question over Marco Polo so that we can continue having those discussions when we're not physically in the same space. And part of why I think that's been really helpful for us is that we see each other maybe one night a week, usually. And that means we get like 6 hours of awake time with each other a week, maybe. And we don't want to spend a lot of that processing. We want to be able to just enjoy ourselves and have fun and like, you know, do other things. And so having this way that's like asynchronous, but also still high context and having video instead of just like audio or written communication has been really nice. The deep dive deck, what I did is I went through it and pulled out questions that I thought were like super applicable to that relationship to use for that one. In both decks, you're going to have some questions that just don't apply. One thing that I would say about this game that I kind of wish, though I get why they probably didn't do it because it'd be a lot more work, would be to have like kind of rough groupings or categories of cards so that you could like take out ones that you knew were not going to apply to you a little bit more easily, like with some kind of like symbol or code to help you know what category that is. Because like for instance, any questions about cohabitating with a partner are just not applicable to me. I'm not currently cohabitating with a partner. I haven't in a very long time. Cohabitating with a partner is something that I am very hesitant to agree to for a whole lot of reasons. And I don't have any relationships that are anywhere close to that. So going through questions about cohabitation for me at this stage, it's a lot of like hypothetical, way off in the future, not particularly probable stuff to talk about. And so skipping those cards every time just gets a little bit annoying, right? And again, there's always going to be cards that are like not going to be applicable to certain people. I think the other big thing I would say about this is that I think playing it as a game where you just like shuffle a deck and grab cards, for me, so as a therapist who works with non-monogamous couples, one of the big problems I see with people who are like established in non-monogamy is they get into this pattern of spending the majority of their time together, like processing their relationship and doing those kinds of things in a way that makes it really hard for them to enjoy their relationship and to, you know, really be a part of that relationship. And I think that this kind of card game, when played that way, can make it really easy for a date night to become like a bigger, deeper processing session. I think for me, going through random cards, I think it's hard to know like how to make that kind of boundaried in a way that feels like we're getting what we need from the exercise of going through these questions and communicating without it like taking over our date or taking over our time together. And I think maybe something like time limits per question or time limits for the game could be helpful with that. But I also think that for the way my brain works and the way my schedule works right now, the kind of like different method that my sweetie and I came up with of doing these questions over Marco Polo has made it way more accessible to do this because like realistically, I would not want to play this game on every date. I would probably not want to play this game more than once a month. I think for me the concern is like how do you engage in these like necessary components of developing and maintaining and exploring what your connection is and like how it's working and what you each want in a way that doesn't end up making the whole relationship processing. And I think that's a very difficult balance to strike for a lot of people. And so with this game, with this huge deck of cards, I think that there's this way that it can feel a little challenging to like just take the whole stack and then start doing a few of them and see how many you get through, especially if you're going to shuffle every time. And so for me, the way that I did of like pulling out some cards that I thought were particularly applicable to this relationship that we can answer in our own time without it taking up our date time, for me has felt like a better use of this tool. But I think that because of the way that it's built, it does give you a lot of flexibility. You know, you can kind of use these cards any way you want to. I do think that they seem very high quality. The card stock is like very thick. So they're super nice. They've got, you know, the nice printing, and the box itself has the nice like foil embellishments. I have a little bit of a like, on like, is this a like 2 AFABs and an AMAB kind of thing? But it's generic humanoid figures. And yeah, again, I do think that it is pretty. You could definitely leave it out. I don't have a lot of like coffee table space where I would leave it out. But it might end up on this shelf behind me, just kind of hanging out there. But I do think it's one of those things where like people who use this tool may need to figure out the way that works for their brains and their relationships that makes it useful. Because again, to me, I think that it is, especially in relationships where I have limited time with the person, I want us to be able to talk about these topics, but I don't want all of our limited time to get eaten up by talking about these topics. And so like finding that balance is challenging, and having that asynchronous thing I think is more helpful. And again, the selectivity I think is helpful for me. That like for me, the method of like take the whole deck and just grab some cards feels like it's not that it's bad. It's that like for me, I would rather like get to the questions that I think are the most important in this relationship at this time, because again, I have such limited time. If I had a partner I was seeing like 3 days a week, 4 days a week, I think it would feel less weird to just sit down with a whole deck and try to make it happen. But when I'm seeing someone like once a week and we're not getting a ton of like actual waking time together, sitting down with the whole deck and hoping we get to cards that are applicable doesn't feel as great for me. And again, I don't think that's an issue of the card game. I think that the game as a whole is actually a great tool. No tool is going to be right for everybody. I think that it's something that can be really helpful in exploring stuff you didn't even know you maybe needed to explore. Like a card that came up with my sweetie was about like, how would you feel if you were out on a date with one of your partners or one of your lovers or paramours and you ran into another one of them? And he had never really thought of that and had no idea like how that would feel for him, or if that was even like likely to happen. And so we got to talk about like, is that something you would want to experience? Like, do you want to try it out? Could your partner and I collaborate on a way to like give you this experience, if that would be helpful for you, if you think that's something you want to like experiment with and explore and see how it is for you. And I think it created a really good opportunity for finding some spaces for growth and play and exploration that maybe we might not have talked about. And I think also that, again, it is something that you want to be aware of, like how much of your relationship is processing your relationship and how much of your relationship is relating. Now, playing this in a group, I haven't played it in a group personally. There are a lot of questions about like, as part of this polycule or larger relationship structure. And so I think the idea there is that you could get together with like a larger portion of your polycule, so like you and a couple of your partners and maybe a couple of their partners, and like all play together. And I think that some of these cards are more applicable to that than others. A lot of the stuff in the Foundations deck I think could be a little interesting to talk about in a larger polycule setting, because a lot of them seem framed a little bit more around like particular things that people negotiate in each dyadic connection rather than a thing that the polycule negotiates as a whole. And I think there's also some elements there of like how you approach non-monogamy, of like, are decisions made by the entire group that apply to the entire group? Are decisions made in each individual connection? And then people figure out what those interactions mean for them. Like, how are you processing those things? And so I think that like the kinds of relationships that I have right now and that I've had in my recent past I wouldn't necessarily think to invite like a few of my sweeties over to play this game together all at the same time, because our agreements have been very much about each connection on its own rather than something that all of us are talking about together. So I think that, again, it's one of those things of like, if you have a more tightly connected polycule or a polycule where more people are making a decision at the same time, that would be more applicable. I do think that if you're playing this in a group larger than about 4, it could get, I think it would be important to figure out how you're going to make it feel like it is still engaging and enjoyable for everybody, because I think that it could really easily get kind of bogged down and slow depending on how you were doing it. And I think that that's just a thing to keep in mind, is that this is a game, but it's also not a game. Like this is a tool that is similar to like a coaching or therapy kind of question that you're going to be answering. And so it is something that is intensive on your system in terms of the amount of vulnerability it requires, in terms of the amount of resourcing it may require for you to feel like you can engage with it fully. And so I think that some cards are going to be easier than others to have like a more prolonged engagement with this exercise, whereas I think for some people it could really easily like burn out their emotional reserves if it's not, again, pretty clearly boundaried in terms of like time and energy and engagement that's going to be involved in it. And so that's the thing, is that like this is a game, but it's not a game like Bananagrams is a game. And so I think it's important to just remember that if you're playing it, I would recommend setting like a time limit where you're going to stop, or like a number of questions you're going to do and then you're going to stop, and set that way shorter than you think it needs to be, because it's much better to stop early so you still have energy to try again another time, rather than to get burned out, which then starts to build like negative associations with those tools or those kinds of discussions. So those would be my ideas and recommendations. Again, I do think this is a great tool. I think it's pretty. I think it's a lot of really interesting ideas. I'm very glad that it exists. And, definitely check it out if you're interested. So their Instagram is the Non-Monogamy card game. You can find all their links there for sure, and a way to buy it. It is already available for sale, so you can buy your own copy. Yeah, I think it's great. I think, I'm gonna have my assistant reach out to them after we post this video and see if they want to like get together and chat in real time, because we're all Bay Area now, and talk about kind of like their thought behind it, and the different ways that I may be experiencing it or viewing it, and like what their thoughts and recommendations are for that. I think a lot of times when we put tools out into the world, we can't foresee like the ways that it interacts with the people that we're giving it to. And that's true of like my book and my worksheets. That's true of like everybody, right? And so I think it would be really fun to have a conversation with them about how they got to this product, what their goals were, what their thoughts have been, like what my experience was of it, and like what their thoughts are around that. And I just love chatting about this stuff with people who are doing cool stuff in the realm of non-monogamy. So again, the Non-Monogamy card game, boop boop, boop boop. I thought it was a really interesting tool. I think that it could be super helpful for a lot of folks, especially if you're someone who finds it harder to have these conversations without some kind of like guide or tool or something. It's a good way to kind of help you explore conversations that may be harder to start, or like topics you may not think to bring up. So yeah, definitely recommend it. Check it out, the Non-Monogamy card game, and yeah, I'll see y'all again soon.